Who could be more galvanizing to listen to on this night than Jessica Valenti? From her blog, feministing.com, to her writing in The Guardian, she has been an unfailingly clear-eyed observer of the struggles of us all. If you haven't checked out her brand new newsletter, This Week in Patriarchy, through The Guardian, you must, I assure you. It defines required reading. In her memoir, Sex Object, Jessica examines the things that shaped her, and again, she shows a unique ability to use personal experience to speak to greater truth. Cecile Richards, the head of Planned Parenthood, wrote that Jessica's personal story highlights universal truths about being a woman and makes the case for why feminism today is an unstoppable force, which is perhaps something that the world understands a little bit better after today. Please help me welcome Jessica Valenti.
Hello. So, was there anyone who was not at the march today? Oh, a couple. Okay, a couple people. They're like, that's okay. Is everyone feeling like revved up, tired, exhausted, like sweaty, chapped? I've heard very tired legs. I hope everyone got to pee and drink water. I didn't drink any water for the entirety of the day with the hope that I wouldn't have to use a porta potty. That did not turn out to be the case. So I'm gonna read a little bit from the book, and hopefully we'll have a nice conversation afterwards. But before reading, I just wanted to say a couple of things, obviously, because it's such a huge and special and an incredible day. I feel like for the first time in a long time, I feel optimistic. It's the first day that I've had that optimistic feeling come back to me. I think like a lot of people, sort of since Election Day, I've been walking around with this pit in my stomach, and just feeling horrible, because I knew it was bad. I do this work. I write about these issues every day. I know how much misogyny is out there. I know that women are hated, but I didn't think it was that bad. I didn't think it was that bad, and I'm regretting not sort of being more clear-eyed on that. And one of the things that the book is about is the impact of a lifetime of misogyny on women, right? Like this cumulative effect of everything from the small microaggressions, the small slights, the everyday slights, to the bigger assaults, the harassment, and sort of what it all does to us. And we haven't necessarily had this conversation about what it means, what it does to us emotionally and psychologically to live in a world that hates women. And after the election, and I'm betting a lot of you have stories like this, a lot of the women I knew were getting sick. They were nauseous all the time. I mean, literally physically sick, having migraines. I had a friend who had never had a pimple in her life all of a sudden break out in acne. I got shingles, which I didn't know that you could get if you were 38 years old, but apparently you can. And it was just this physical manifestation, right, of the stress and the trauma that's been done. And it's interesting because it's sort of the feeling that I wanted to get to in this book, this feeling that we're having right now. And while I do want to talk about sort of what comes next, and I think the march is such a great start for that, where do we go from here? And there's been a lot of conversation about, well, this is great, and it's so incredible that these big numbers turned out, but what now, and how do you galvanize in a tangible way? I think, of course, that's really important, but I also think that sometimes it's okay to sit in that uncomfortability for a while, and it's okay to just acknowledge that this is a really difficult time, and we don't always have to be looking towards the future. We can sit with ourselves in the present for a moment, and that's all right too. And that it's okay to feel bad, and it's okay to feel sick. I think that's your body's sort of very understandable reaction, and its way of letting you know that something is really very wrong right now. So with that extraordinarily cheerful intro, I'm gonna read to you from the book. What I'm gonna start with is the first essay in the book, which is an essay called Line Violence. And this essay, which I wrote before I knew I was writing a book, is really what kicked off sort of the idea for Sex Object. And so that's where it's coming from. It's called Line Violence. It took me a long time to realize I was not the only girl whose high school teacher asked her on a date. Not the only one who sat on the train across from a man who had forgotten to zip his fly on the day he forgot to wear underwear so that his penis still tucked in his jeans was fully visible. I remember joking about it with my father, the weirdo with his dick showing. He had to explain to me that it wasn't an accident. I am not the only one who had a boyfriend who called me stupid, not the only one who grew up being told to be careful around groups of boys, even if they were my friends. When I was 12, the same year I saw my first penis on a New York City subway platform, 2 years before I would lose my virginity to a guy from Park Slope who filled in his sideburn gaps with his mom's eyeliner, and 6 years before I would fail out of college, tired of frat boys taping used condoms to my dorm room door, I started to have trouble sleeping. I felt sick all the time. I know it's called the cycle of violence, but in my family, female suffering is linear. Rape and abuse are passed down like the world's worst birthright, largely skipping the men and marking the women with scars, night terrors, and fantastic senses of humor. My mother told me about getting molested by a family friend as part of our bad touch talk. She called him her uncle. We were sitting on my twin bed in a room covered with glow-in-the-dark star stickers. She was 8 when he came to the house with ice cream, and while her mother cooked dinner in the kitchen, he told her to come sit on his lap if she wanted some. She doesn't remember what he touched or how, just that it happened and that she said nothing afterward. When my grandmother was 10, her father died of alcoholism and she went to live with an aunt and uncle. When she was 11, her uncle raped her. She told her aunt, and the next day was sent to St. Joseph's Orphanage in Brooklyn. It's losing steam with each generation, so that's something. My grandmother's rape is my mother's molestation, is me getting off relatively easy with abusive boyfriends and strangers fondling me on subways, one time without my realizing until I went to put my hands in my jeans' back pockets and there was semen all over them. My aunts and mom joked about how often it happened to them when they were younger. The one man who flashed his jacket open and had a big red bow on his cock. The neighborhood pervert who masturbated visibly in his window as they walked to school as girls. The cops told them the man could do whatever he wanted in his own house. Just point and laugh, my aunt said. That usually sends them running. Usually. But worse than the violations themselves was the creeping understanding of what it meant to be female. That it's not a matter of if something bad happens, but when and how bad. Of course, what feels like a matrilineal curse is not really ours. We don't own it. The shame and disgust belong to the perpetrators. At least that's what the books say. But the frequency with which women in my family have been hurt or sexually assaulted starts to feel like a flashing message encoded in our DNA. Hurt me. My daughter is 5, and I want to inoculate her against whatever it is that keeps happening to the women in my family. I want Layla to have her father's lucky genes, genes that walk into a room and feel entitled to be there, genes that feel safe, not my out-of-place chromosomes that are fight or flight ready. This is the one way in which I wish she was not mine. When I was pregnant, I often joked about wanting a boy. A baby girl would turn into a teenage girl, and I remember the young asshole I was to my mother. But this is closer to the truth. Having a girl means passing this thing on to her, this violence and violations without end. Because while my daughter lives in a world that knows what happens to women is wrong, it has also accepted this wrongness as inevitable. When a rich man in Delaware was given probation for raping his 3-year-old daughter, there was outrage. But it was the lack of punishment that seemed to offend, not the seemingly immovable fact that some men rape 3-year-olds. Prison time we can measure and control. That some men do horrible things to little girls, however, is presented as a given. Living in a place that is given up on the expectation of your safety means walking around in a permanently dissociative state. You watch these things happen to you. You walk through them on the subway and on the street. You see them on the television. You hear them in the music, and it's just in the air you breathe, so you narrate the horror to yourself because to engage with it would be self-destruction. I spoke on a panel once with a famous New Age author/guru in leather pants, and she said that the problem with women is that we don't speak from our power, but from a place of victimization. As if the traumas forced upon us could be shaken off with a steady voice, as if we had actual power to speak from. Victimhood doesn't need to be an identity, but it is a product of facts. Some women heal by rejecting victimhood, but in a world that regularly tells women they're asking for it, I don't know that laying claim to victim is such a terrible idea. Recognizing suffering is not giving up, and it's not weak. Something bad happened to me. More accurately, someone did something bad to me. This happened. This happens. When this reality started to become more and more clear to me, as I grew breasts and took subways, watched movies, and fucked boys, I didn't make a conscious decision not to lie down and die, but But I do know that my survival instinct took over, and I became the loudest girl, the quickest with a sex joke, the one who laughed at old men coming on to her. If I was going to be a sex object, I was going to be the best sex object I could be. Over 20 years later, I still feel sick. I still can't sleep. But at least now I understand why. We know that direct violence causes trauma. We have shelters for it, counselors, services. We know that children who live in violent neighborhoods are more likely to develop PTSD, the daily fear changing their brains and psychological makeup so drastically that flashbacks and disassociation become common. We know that people who are bullied get depressed and sometimes commit suicide. Yet despite all these things we know to be true, despite the preponderance of evidence showing the mental and emotional distress people demonstrate in violent and harassing environments, we still have no name for what happens to women living in a culture that hates them. We are sick people with no disease, given no explanation for our supposedly disconnected symptoms. When you catch a cold or a virus, your body has ways of letting you know that you're sick. You cough, you get a fever, your limbs literally hurt. But what diagnosis do you give to the shaking hands you get after a stranger whispers pussy in your ear on the way to work? What medicine can you take to stop being afraid that the cab driver is not actually taking you home? And what about those of us who walk through all this without feeling any of it? What does it say about the hoops our brain had to jump through to get to ambivalence? I don't believe any of us walk away unscathed. I do know, though, that a lot of us point and laugh. The strategy of my aunts and mother is now my default reaction when a 15-year-old on Instagram calls me a cunt, or when a grown-up reporter writes something about my tits, both things that have happened. Just keep pointing and laughing, rolling your eyes, with the hope that someone will finally notice that this is not very funny. Pretending these offenses roll off our backs is strategic. Don't give them the fucking satisfaction. But it isn't the truth. You lose something along the way. Mocking the men who hurt us, as mockable as they are, starts to feel like acquiescing to the most condescending of catcalls, you look better when you smile. Because even subversive sarcasm adds a cool girl nonchalance, an updated, sharper version of the expectation that women be forever pleasant, even as we're eating shit. This sort of posturing as a performance that requires strength I do not have anymore. Rolling with the punches and giving as good as we're getting requires that we subsume our pain under a veneer of I don't give a shit. This inability to be vulnerable, the unwillingness to be victims, even if we are, doesn't protect us, it just covers up the wreckage. But no one wants to listen to our sad stories unless they're smoothed over with a joke or a nice melody, and even then, not always. No one wants to hear a woman talking or writing about pain in a way that suggests that it doesn't end. Without a pat solution, silver lining, or happy ending, we're just complainers, downers who don't realize how good we actually have it. Men's pain and existential angst are the stuff of myth and legends and narratives that shape everything we do, but women's pain is a backdrop, a plot development to push the story along for the real protagonists. Disrupting that story means we're needy or selfish, or worst of all, man-haters, as if after all men have done to women over the ages, the mere act of not liking them for it is most offensive. Yes, we love the good men in our lives, and sometimes, oftentimes, the bad ones too, but that we're not in full revolution against the lot of them is pretty amazing when you consider this truth. Men get to rape and kill women and still come home to a dinner cooked by one. Somewhere along the way, I started to care more about what men thought of me than my own health and happiness, because doing so was just easier. I bought into the lie that the opposite of victim is strong, that pointing and laughing and making it easier on everybody was the best way to tell our stories. But if you're sick and you want to be well, you need to relay the details of your symptoms. Glossing over them ensures a lifetime of illness. My daughter is happy and brave. When she falls down or gets hurt, the first words out of her mouth are always, "I'm all right, Mom. I'm okay." And she is. I want her to be okay always. So while my refusal to keep laughing or making you comfortable may seem like a real fucking downer, the truth is that this is what optimism looks like. Naming what is happening to us, telling the truth about it, as ugly and uncomfortable as it can be, means that we want it to change, that we know it's not inevitable. I want the line of my mother and grandmother to stop here. Thank you. So dehydrated. I'm gonna read from one more essay before we go into conversation. There's a lot of you here, and I want to make sure people get to ask questions. This is called 1995, and it's about my junior year in high school in New York. In my junior year of high school, I had cut one of my classes for weeks, but my teacher said he could still pass me. All I had to do was give him a hug. At first, I was thrilled to be in a class with a teacher that I'll call Mr. Z. He was a well-known easy grader in kind of a joke in a sad old man way. He had what we suspected was a glass eye, a hard time keeping drool in his mouth as he spoke, and walked with difficulty. The kinds of classes he taught were normally held on the 6th floor, but the administrators made sure he was out of sight on the 10th. On the first day of class, Mr. Z told us if anyone came in to observe the class, an important-looking person, we should raise our hand no matter what question he asked. If you don't know the answer, raise your right hand. If you do know the answer, raise your left hand. I'll only call on you if you're raising the left. Everyone looked around each other, smirking. The social currency at Stuyvesant High School wasn't coolness as much as it was ambition and the ability to get good grades, even if you didn't deserve them, and easy teachers were a necessity for students who had overloaded on calculus and AP science classes. I was not one of those students. Mr. Z didn't really teach as much as he showed movies like Braveheart, but one day he had an actual lesson, and though he almost never called on students, he called on me. Come up to the board, Jessica. He smiled, small bits of white spit accumulating at the corners of his mouth. We all want to get a closer look at your shirt. He laughed, but the class was silent. I wasn't really wearing a shirt, but a brown bodysuit, which was popular at the time. It's coming back into style, FYI. It snapped at the crotch, and I wore it with baggy jeans baggy enough to see the cutout above my hips. I remember the way that I slid sideways through the rows of desks, my arms crossed across my chest. I don't remember what I wrote on the board. I never went back to the class. When I started at Stuyvesant as a freshman, I went from being one of the smartest kids in my junior high school to being a nominally good student without the same drive and pedigree of my cute and smart girlfriends. Their parents had gone to college, grad school even. They lived on the Upper West Side or in Park Slope apartments filled with books and paintings and cabinets full of alcohol. One friend had an entire floor of a 4-story Parkside brownstone as their room. I lived in a house where once or twice a week my mom would go outside wearing yellow rubber gloves to clean up the used condoms that littered the sidewalk from the men who parked there with prostitutes. One of my best girlfriends was a dancer who had professional headshots for when she did the occasional acting job. She was the kind of waspy pretty I desperately wanted to be, the kind of beauty that provoked starry-eyed crushes instead of ass slaps. She lived in a duplex apartment with a spiral staircase, and we bonded as freshmen over our junior year boyfriends. The first time she came over to my house, she remarked how much she liked my mom's uneducated accent. "It's cute," she said, smiling as she helped herself to a soda from the fridge. That same year, I was called to the board in Mr. Z's class in 1995. Stuyvesant started investigating an English teacher for describing sex fantasies and his masturbation routine to his class. He talked about having a dream in which he raped a maid who had his wife's face. Another student said he asked her to play spin the bottle with him and later let her out of writing an essay because she was pretty. He was suspended for a few months, and then 4 years later, after a different man, an assistant principal, was arrested for fondling and exposing himself to a freshman, he was suspended again. That first time, though, the feigned outrage in the school only lasted as long as the newspaper articles did. We had a brief student assembly on the subject and moved on. My favorite French teacher also had complaints filed against him, but he was dapper and wore suits to class and asked me and my friends what kind of wine we liked. So while we weren't clear on the details of the accusations against him, my friends and I felt quite strongly at the time that they were total bullshit. He didn't need to harass anyone. One day, as this teacher walked alongside me and one of my friends on Chambers Street, he told us about the girl, this troubled girl, he called her, who had made up lies about him. I was trying to help her, to tutor her, he said, but because she knew she was failing the class anyway, this is what she said. She is very troubled. I felt older and important that he was confiding in us, and it never occurred to me that perhaps a teacher should not be discussing the sexual harassment allegations against him with a 16-year-old student. That this in itself was a violation of boundaries escaped me, because we were so smart. So we just nodded our heads in agreement. Yes, clearly she was very troubled. There were always rumors in our high school about an apartment that 3 teachers owned together near the school where they would take turns bringing students, but no one really knew if it was true. And even if it was, we didn't care because we thought we were so fucking cosmopolitan that the idea of teachers conspiring to molest students didn't strike us as criminal, just pathetic and disgusting. So much so that it became a joke among my friends how a teacher who had known me since I was 13 years old, a man in his 30s, called my parents home and asked me to hang out a few days after I graduated. I was 17 at the time. He referred to himself by his first name, which I didn't really know, so it took me a few minutes to realize that the man asking me if I wanted to see a movie was the same man who had taught me for years. I don't remember what I said to him in return, just that it was some version of no. It never occurred to me that school should be a sanctuary from the bullshit that was happening outside, the catcalls and the subway flashers, the gropers. This was just what men were like. This is just what being a girl was. A few weeks before my first semester of junior year was going to end, I ran into Mr. Z in the hallway, and he pointed at me, smiling. He was wearing a striped shirt that was slightly discolored in spots. "I've been missing you," he said as he walked up to me. He was breathing heavily, as if the walk down the hall had taken effort. He asked if I still wanted a good grade, and I responded that of course I did. "Just give me a hug then," he said, opening his arms. "All I want is a hug from you." I aced the class. So that's it. Thank you. So I'll take some questions now, if you guys have them. And I know that there's some microphones set up. I know folks are probably hoarse from screaming out slogans all day, but hello.
Hi. Thank you so much for that. That was such a great reading.
Thank you.
I'm interested in any thoughts or observations you have of how this culture that we live in as women affects our own conceptions of our own sexuality, like our own fantasy life, the way that we like turn ourselves on.
Right.
Because we talk a lot about how in this book men turn themselves on. So I'm curious in your thoughts about that.
I think about this a lot, and it's such a hard question because it's not something that we've been sort of given access to, right? Like an organic understanding of our own sexuality outside of the way that it's presented through the male gaze and presented through male desire. And so I think that we're honestly just sort of starting to get to that place now. And I look to, to feminist writers who are doing great work on this. Jacqueline Friedman, who co-edited a book with me called Yes Means Yes, has done a lot of really amazing writing on this. It's hard. It's something that I still struggle with and that I don't know the answer to, which is always like a shitty answer to give. But, yeah, that's awesome. So quiet. Hi.
Hi. Sorry. Okay. So you talk actually a lot in your book about kind of like the evolution of catcalling and I don't know, like sexually men like exposing themselves to you in your life. And something that I've noticed as I'm entering my 20s is that I was catcalled a lot more during my pubescent years than I am now, and I don't think it's that I'm uglier.
No.
So I'm just wondering kind of your thoughts on that, like kind of like this like weird like undercurrent of bizarre pedophilia.
Yeah, well, the good news is it happens almost zero once you're in your 30s. So no, I have noticed that. I mean, I really have noticed that as well. Like it was like once I got to like 18 to 20, it stopped. And I think it's for a couple of reasons. I think that like I think that the kind of men who do this, right, are predators. These are not good men. This is like not a normal male reaction. And they are looking to target girls who they think will be afraid and who will not do anything and who will not fight back or yell or call them out. I think that I'm a bit optimistic about this. I feel like it's changing a lot because of the internet and social media and groups like Hollaback and like women taking pictures of catcallers and sort of publicly shaming them. So that gives me a lot of hope on this front. But yeah, it's really distressing. And, my daughter is 6 now. She's in 1st grade. And I was thinking the other day, like, okay, when did I start taking the subway to school? I was in 6th grade. I think I was like 11. She's going to have to take the subway to school one day, and she's going to be a young girl. I had a friend in junior high who was very petite. She was like 5'1", and her parents wanted her, even though they didn't normally allow her to wear makeup on the subway, to wear lipstick because they wanted her to look older. Because they knew that if she looked a little bit older, that maybe she wouldn't get harassed as much, which is so twisted. But I think that that's absolutely true, and I've heard that from a lot of women. Yeah, unfortunately. Thank you. Hello.
I have a question for you about, it's a little like less related to your book, but in general, you were talking about now, we're thinking about where do we go from here. And I know in the past you've talked about too that it's been really hard to continue on some days when people are just really terrible.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm wondering for you, what do you use as your motivation to keep going, especially on a day like today when we do feel hopeful, but we've had so many months where we don't feel hopeful?
Valium and therapy help. I say that jokingly, but also seriously. Like as a person who like grew up with working class parents, right? Like seeking like mental health services was like, oh, that's for rich people. Like we don't do that. But like I do think support both from like our community and our communities online and our communities offline, and are so important. And that is what has helped me. I think what's hard is that, I'll get like 100 emails a week calling me a cunt, right? And that's so much easier to hear and to see than like the couple of emails I get saying like, I really liked your book, right? And of course those are the emails that are more important, but like the other emails feel so loud. And I think that that's true for a lot of people who are not necessarily like writers or like professional activists or whatever, but who are feminists and interested in this work and speak out on this issue. Like the negative can feel so overwhelming. I think finding that support, finding that community, it doesn't have to be in real life. It can in real life. Online is real life, but like, yes, it can be online. It can be offline. I think, events like the one today and marches like the one today are incredible, but like, yeah, we do need to figure out a way to like hold on to that feeling to carry us through. One of the things that I've done that's been helpful, I feel like when you're thinking about like feminism and sexism, it feels like such like this big amorphous, like, okay, gonna like take on the patriarchy today, right? Like how do you do that? I think that if you can find sort of small goals for yourself, like small measurable, like not easy to meet, but possible to meet goals. Like when I wrote my first book, for example, I wasn't like, I'm gonna cure sexism with this book. What I wanted was that I wanted like some young women who didn't call themselves feminists before to call themselves feminists. That happened. And so that made me feel like, okay, I have accomplished like this small but important thing, and I can go on. And I think that if we sort of give ourselves like little wins, if we set ourselves up for little wins, it can make it a bit easier.
Thank you.
Sure. Pussy hat coming through.
Well, I couldn't march today because I have a sprained foot, so
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm really bummed. I was watching it online. Channel me. I have sort of a big question.
Okay.
In regards to violence against women in society, and not just American society, but other societies as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, there's a range.
Mm-hmm.
Some societies or countries sort of encourage this, I think, or harassment at least,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily the violence. Some sort of ignore it as normal, which is where I think we are. Some see that, yeah, individual men may be sick, but society as a whole doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's societies that really discourage it and don't tolerate it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And my question, the big question, is what is the differences in these societies that you come to that point?
Where is the society that is like zero tolerance?
Oh, am I
What do you
wrong?
think?
Well, I'm not saying zero tolerance
Okay.
necessarily, but it's more the fact that men automatically seem to know that this is not appropriate behavior and you shouldn't
Sure.
even be, not
I
that
mean,
it
I think-
never happens, but
Sure. I mean,
whereas other places it's expected and even encouraged in some
sure.
ways.
I mean, I think like
They have the right to do this.
right. There are a couple of things like that are measurable in places where there's more female political leadership. For example, you do see less of this problem in culture, right? Like there's a cultural shift when there's more women in political leadership positions, which like just like it makes me feel really bad. But even then, like I think part of the problem is it's not a policy problem, right? Like because even we can say like in other cultures this is sort of encouraged and it's fine, but here we ignore it. I don't even know that we ignore it. I sort of like think that we give a lot of forgiveness for it here as well. Like our policies say rape is wrong. Our policies, say sexual assault and harassment is wrong. Our culture like doesn't give a shit. Like the way that those policies are actually carried out and sexual assault actually happens does not mirror what our laws say. And so I don't know what the answer is, besides to continue doing what we're doing, which is to try to get more women in power, not just like up here, but at the state level, at the community level, right? Like in schools. I think that, that's a huge thing that I've been thinking about lately. I asked a bunch of young people, like, where did you learn about rape culture, right? And they were like, Tumblr. that was like overwhelmingly what I heard was like Tumblr online. Like no one, like there was no, in their sex education classes, there was no, you know, maybe there was like a short video on rape or something like that, but like most of this is like self-education that's happening. And so I guess one sort of small tangible way we can think about it is like, what does education look like, not just at the college level, but at junior high and high school, when we're talking about the way that we talk to each other, like women and men, when we're talking about sexuality, what does that look like? And right now it's not great. We don't have like a, you know, we have a national standard for a lot of things in education. We have no national standard for how to teach about rape or sexual assaults, which I think maybe we need. Thanks. Oh, thanks.
Hi, I
Hello.
was wondering what, if anything, you have found to be success. So one of the things that I loved about your book was that I felt like it spoke to me as a woman, and I feel like I have not yet met a woman who has had no experience with harassment or catcalling or any sort of the hatred and the disrespect that you speak about. My question is, and I know that there's a lot of men that have been victims and survivors of harassment and abuse and assault as well, but there's also a lot more men who haven't and who don't feel that sort of that daily environment. So what have you found to be successful for personally engaging men and caring about this?
You know what's really strange and odd and unfortunate and crazy, but the Trump tapes, when that happened with like the grabbing them by the pussy stuff, I've like never seen so many men come out to talk about this issue and say, I knew that this was an issue, because I think after those tapes came out, so many women came out and started talking about it, like, this happened to me and this is the way that I've been spoken to. And the thing I heard from a lot of men was, I knew this was an issue. I didn't know that it was like an everyday issue. I didn't realize how unrelenting it was throughout women's lives, that it wasn't just like, oh, this thing happened to me once and it was sort of a pain in the ass, but like it's like this constant chipping away at your sense of self and safety. And so I think sometimes it does take like a big cultural shift, like the one that happened there. And I think what's been really hard for a lot of people who do anti-sexual violence work right now is, you know, with Trump's getting elected, like, I think a lot of survivors and a lot of people who care about this issue have been sent the message that, like, it doesn't really matter. And you do all the reading about, like, all the people who supported Trump and hearing from them that it's like, it's not a big deal. This is the way men talk. This is the way men are. Let's just, like, I think that that's a really hard thing to overcome. And again, I think the younger we start, the better, but just not normalizing this as like, and it's such an insult to men too, right? Like that's so, like, if I was a man, I would be so offended that, like, oh yeah, guys are just awful and talk about sexually assaulting women. Like, no, I don't buy that. I know that's not true. So yeah, I mean, unfortunately, everything that's happened in the last couple of months with the election, I think, has opened up this conversation and will continue to open up this conversation. What I am worried about, though, is, you know, some people may have seen that one of Trump's first things is that he's gonna cut the Violence Against Women office and VAWA funding and grants, which is allocated, you know, millions and hundreds of millions of dollars to, you know, domestic violence services and rape shelters and all of this sort of stuff. My concern is that we're going to be so busy, like, trying to stop that and stop the bleeding, like the immediate bleeding, that we're not going to have the space to have those conversations, because we're going to have our hands so full with protecting those, that money and those wins. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I saw that you tweeted a couple of days ago about the decision of the march organizers to have a pro-life organization as their sponsor, and then I saw that they went back on that.
Yeah.
And I was having a debate with some of my friends today about that, and a lot of them felt that they shouldn't have gone back on that, and that this should be a march that really celebrated all women, regardless of whether they followed a more traditional feminist ideology. So I'd just love to know what you would have said to them.
I think that, you know, this idea that feminism is about all women is just false. right? Like, feminism is not about, like, sisterhood for every single... Feminism is a social and political, like, movement for justice. And if you're talking about justice, you can't leave out abortion rights, and you can't leave out, like, the right for women to be able to have bodily integrity and become parents or not become parents. Like, it's just so central to, you know, even economic justice, that it can't be separated to me. You know, and I think what's so hard about this is that we've been going down this road with feminism in the last 10 years, and, like, I feel like my work was a part of this too. Like, we wanted so much for feminism to be accessible to everyone, right? We're like, yes, you're a feminist, call yourself a feminist, like, everyone can be a feminist. No, actually, that's not true, right? And then it backfired on us, and we had, like, Sarah Palin calling herself a feminist, and people who are, you know, pushing policies that actively hurt women and their rights and their families calling themselves feminists. And so, you know, no, I hate the idea of, like, I'm not the arbiter of who's a feminist or not. Like, I hate the idea of policing, like, who gets to call themselves a feminist or not. But we sort of have to do it now, right? Because, like, people understand, and the conservative women's movement especially understands how powerful feminist rhetoric is right now. They know it. And that's why they're calling themselves feminists while they're stripping women of rights, while poor women and immigrant women and women of color are being hurt most of all in this country. Like, look at what's happening in Texas and the maternal mortality rate that has skyrocketed since they cut funding for family planning services, right? Like, that is integral to women's rights and justice for women. And we have to take a stand on it. Like, this is not, you know, like, yes, it was a feel-good day, but it's a movement for justice more than anything else. Sorry, I can get very worked up about this.
Thank you.
But thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi there. I'm interested in your thoughts as a mother of a daughter. I have two daughters, 19 and 17, and they were very excited and motivated by today. But as I think about the world that they're living in and what they're facing, I feel, wow, we have gone so far backwards. I mean, we have a cabinet that looks like Mad Men, the Mad Men era. And I'm well and truly shocked by that. I mean, I really thought that we had made big strides. And my younger daughter, her takeaway from the election was that men can do things that people would not deem acceptable, but actually they can get away with it. And women have to be, 150%. And that still might not be good enough. And I'm just wondering, obviously our daughters are very different ages, but as you sort of think about what you impart to your children, what you want them to see, what you want young women to understand about the world that they live in, that they do have control over, that they can do something with, or how they should, assess the world that they're living in.
I would say a couple of different things. Obviously, like you said, my daughter is 6, and so when she understood what was happening with the election, and she was upset when Trump won, and what I told her was, she, in her school, they're very social justice oriented, which is wonderful, and she's learned about the civil rights movement, and she's learned about people who have protested and done all these amazing things. And so I said to her, remember all this stuff that you learned about, like, people have been dealing with this for a long time, and we will too, and there are things that we can do. And what I would say to older girls, and what I do believe to be true, is that our trajectory is actually going up. We got 3 million more votes, right? Even when a foreign government was interfering with the election. So I do see this as sort of like the last gasp of a dying patriarchy. Fingers crossed. I really do, and I see this as like a backlash emboldened. And I think that's what's happened, and I just don't think it can last. The world is changing. The world has changed, and they're gonna have to move along with it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions? I think we got one more coming. Hello.
Hi, thanks for coming, and I'm glad I came.
Yeah.
I'm also one of the pro-life women who didn't feel welcome at the march today, and I'm not here to attack you, but I want you to know if you see us as mortal enemies, is it always going to be we're at cross purposes?
I think that if I saw a pro-life movement that was committed to increasing access to contraception, that was committed to comprehensive sex education, that was committed to supporting women's health, I could get behind that 100%. That's not the pro-life movement that I see. I see a movement that is committed to abstinence-only education, that teaches falsehoods, dangerous falsehoods to young women and to young men. I see, trying to ban contraception, make contraception inaffordable to women. And I see women suffering every day because of the pro-life policies that folks are supporting. And so until that changes, I think that it has to be like this.
Okay, that really needs to be a longer conversation, but I appreciate your time.
Sure. Hi.
Hi. I'm a little nervous because I think you're incredibly brave.
Oh, thanks.
And we're around the same age, and I've been following you for a long time. Like, we went to high school at the same time, and our little girls are the same age. And so when you talk, it's like, I'm like, yes, that's in my brain. And that what just happened with that gentleman, I don't see how you do that day in and day out, because I'm wearing a very bold shirt, but I'm not a bold person. And the more I think about why, it's related to your ideas in your book about this lifetime of, you just learn to kind of go inside and stay there.
Yeah.
So my question, I guess, is how do you build that bravery?
You fake it a lot. It's true, and I actually write about this in the book, this whole fake it till you make it thing, and it is really hard. And I have a whole section in my book where it's you do talks and you're smile but inside you're dying, and it is really hard. And that's very nice of you to say that you think I'm brave, because I never feel that way, right? And I think in a weird way, it's sometimes easier to do this and to write and to talk in front of big supportive groups. The other day, speaking of bold t-shirts, there's a great group called Shout Your Abortion, and they do amazing work. And I was wearing a sweatshirt that said abortion is freedom. And I was in upstate New York. I was not in New York City, and I was alone with my daughter in the car, and I was getting gas, and I started getting some death stares from people at the gas station, and all of a sudden it really occurred to me how unsafe I was, and how unusual a feeling that was just in that sort of a normal everyday circumstance. And it made me realize that the people who are the bravest are the people who are in red states and in these areas where I am in New York. I go to places like this where people are largely pretty nice to me, right? The stuff that I get online is horrible, but I can deal with it. So to your question about how do you sort of build it up, I think that you do just sort of go and you do it anyway, right? You don't have to feel great about it. I always have a pit in my stomach when I'm like going somewhere or doing a talk or writing something or like posting something that I've written that I'm really nervous about. I like didn't sleep for 3 months before this book came out, right? Like, and that's okay. I don't think that like bravery means that like you feel great and like energized and good and outgoing. It just means that no matter how you feel, you do it anyway. And you're here and you're wearing the shirt, so, right?
Okay, so I just have a quick question. It's not quite related to the book. It's more related to, what happened today, all right? I sort of feel like I was at the march and the word pussy was really equated to this incredible feminist movement that we saw happen today, but I sort of feel that not all people who have pussies are women, and there are people who don't have pussies that are women, you know what I mean? And so I wonder if you could just speak to whether or not that sort of holding this word to be emblematic of what went on, if that's sort of exclusive accidentally.
That's a really great question, I think, and really important. I think that if it wasn't for the tape, right? Of him talking about, I would be like, yeah, let's not do that. And there's been a lot of conversation around like, let's not use the word vaginas around particular things, or when you're talking about reproductive rights, let's talk about people who get pregnant, and let's not talk about, you know what I mean? Like, I think there are ways that we can really be mindful of our language when we're dealing with this. But I hear what you're saying about pussies, though. Like a lot of the signs I saw, like, you don't necessarily have to equate womanhood with pussies, right? Like, it can
I mean,
a pussy can just be a pussy. But thank you for, I mean, I think that that's
cool.
a really important
I just wanted to
conversation.
hear what your thoughts about
totally.
about that were. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Should we end on pussies, or are we going to have one more question? Okay.
Hi, I have not read your book, but I agree with everything you've said. We haven't talked about domestic violence, but I think that if they were to pass a law that says the moment a woman has a restraining order, she's authorized to carry a weapon, I think that would be a powerful deterrent. So I wonder, why have anybody suggested that? Because as long as the man knows there's a possibility she may be carrying a weapon, and he's less likely to succeed, I think the incidences of those women getting killed would be less. Don't you think so?
I mean, unfortunately, the statistics don't bear that out. Most of the time, when there is a gun present in a house and there's a domestic violence situation, a woman's chance of getting murdered goes up 5-fold. So that gun can be, whether it's her gun or his gun. When I used to be an emergency room counselor for domestic violence victims, and one of the first questions we would ask is there a gun in the home? Because we knew that was like a marker for extreme danger and her life being in danger. So I don't think that more guns are the answer, no.
But it seems to me simply not thinking so should not be sufficient to not pass the law. I think we should pass the law anyway, and at least the woman has that option. So yes, some may not succeed, but some will, and those that will, we'd be glad that they would be alive.
Well,
this is what I'm saying.
I mean, there's nothing stopping a woman who has a restraining order from getting a gun. I think what's a more important policy, there are some laws that prevent people who have been convicted of domestic violence from owning a weapon. What we've seen a lot is that men who have not been convicted of domestic violence but who have restraining orders against them still can have weapons and unfortunately use them. And I think that would be a great place to start with policy is
all right, thank you.
Less guns. Thank you.
Hey, I actually had a question. I was interested, you were saying, I don't know if you guys know this, but Jessica has already posted an essay on the march in The Guardian. While we were all just like, having a beer and like brushing our teeth. She's already done that. But you have to synthesize your thoughts so quickly.
Yeah.
How do you do that exactly? And then how do you then, when you were writing your book and you have to have kind of a more sustained arc of thinking, how do you kind of combine those two, and how do you synthesize so quickly?
With the writing and column writing, I think, and I said this to you earlier, I think having a background in blogging where I used to write like 10 posts a day makes it easy for me to write fast. Though there are a lot of times where like I wish I could take a couple, like there are certain articles where you wish you could take a couple of days and like really like sit with something and then write. And then sometimes you want to write something immediately because like the emotions of the moment have really gotten you. And that's sort of what happened today, right? Like I was in this emotional place and sort of, so it becomes easier to write. And actually that's what happened with a lot of the essays in this book, was that once I had written the first one that I read, I was like, oh, I'm really like looking for a catharsis, and like this is coming out of me like like word vomit. And this is like a weird sort of logistical thing to say, but it's actually sort of hard to write when you're a parent, and it's been a challenge for me to figure out, where do I find the time, especially, I wrote this book when I had my job at The Guardian, so like where do you find the time to have like an artistic outlet, or to do this kind of work when you're also parenting, and I haven't quite sorted it out yet, other than not having any like social life to speak of. That's about it.
Thank you. We have time. Why don't we take 2 more questions?
Okay, great.
Hi.
Hello.
So first off, I just wanted to say thank you so much. I am one of those women that didn't call themselves a feminist until I read your book.
Aw.
So you're right, it did work.
Yay, that's amazing.
Thank you very much. And then I was just wondering, what is next for you? What are your upcoming plans? I mean, I know this is kind of a new book, so maybe like a rest period, but
a rest period is always would be good. I mean, it's so hard because I had a very like different year set in front of me a few months ago when I thought things would be going differently, and now I think my focus is really going to be at my work at The Guardian, and not just my column, but doing sort of bigger features. And I really would love to try to like give voice and cover all of the local activism that's happening that I don't think necessarily gets a lot of attention. I think that, you know, when something like this happens, obviously it's in the news, but there are like little forms of amazing activism that happen every day that we don't necessarily get to see. And so I would love to focus on that. Yeah, but as for books, I think like this is it for me for a while. There was a moment like a couple of days after the election where I like busted out a book proposal. I was like, fuck this guy, I'm writing a new book. But then I realized that probably was just more for me than anyone else. And that I think, honestly, I think a lot of the action and the writing that's gonna come out of this moment is gonna be online, because things are changing so quickly and there's like new issues every day. And so I don't know that it lends itself to like a book format. Like it's gonna be the online writing that does it. But thank you for asking.
thank you. I love your podcast too.
Thank you.
Keep going.
Yes. Hi.
That actually leads right into my next question. I was going to ask, regarding the historical waves of feminism, where do you think we are now? I mean, looking at the large marches that we've had, I mean, we had the Slut Walk movement, what was that, like circa 2011-ish, you know, and where we are now, and how many large just consciousness-raising movements and walks and marches that we've had all around the world in the last 5 to 7 years leading up to today. Where are we now, especially with the amount of blogging and just online activism that we have? Are we in a fourth wave? Where are we?
I wrote an article about, or like a blog post about this a while ago, and I called it the fourth waves, plural, because I do think that there's something different going on like you have to give sort of a name to what's happened online, right? Because it has been so different and shifted things so drastically. But I also think that it's a mistake to think that there's like one wave of feminism or one set of issues that we've all like checked off and agreed on, right? Like that's not, I think that there are a lot of different people working on a lot of different issues that are all moving in the same direction, right? And so in that way, I think they're sort of like the fourth waves of feminism, all sort of like supporting each other and propping each other up, but not necessarily doing the exact same thing, and that's okay. And I think that that's been a hard thing for like the media to understand. For example, like I was watching some media coverage of the march, and a pundit was like, "But what are they asking for? They don't know what they're asking for." And I'm like, "Really? Like read the signs. There's a lot of stuff that they're asking for." But like that's okay. Like this idea that like the world moves very fast. We don't need a stagnant like mission statement, right? To do this work. We don't need to all focus on the same thing. We don't need to all agree on everything, and so long as we're all sort of with the core values. And I think that's okay, and I think that makes for like a better and more interesting movement.
Yeah. Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. If anyone didn't want to ask a question or like in front of everyone, I actually am like very, very easy to find at just jessica.valenti@theguardian.com if you want to send me an email, or you can ask me something. I'm going to sit up here for a little while and sign some books. Great. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jessica. We'll start the signing line here, and their books.